The Chrysalids, Chapter 8. My father included Aunt Harriet's name in our prayers on the evening of the day the news came, but after that she was never referred to again. It was as though she had been wiped out of everyone's memory but mine. There, however, she remained very clearly, given form at a time when I had only heard her as an upright figure with a face drained of hope and a voice saying clearly, "I am not ashamed. I am only beaten," and two, as I had last seen her, looking up at the house. Nobody told me how she came to die, but somehow I knew that it had not been by accident. There was a great deal that I did not understand in what I had overheard, and yet, in spite of that, it was quite the most disturbing occurrence I had known yet. It alarmed me, with a sense of insecurity far greater, for some unknown reason, than I had suffered about Sophie. And for several nights I dreamed of Aunt Harriet lying in the river, still clasping the white bundle to her, while the water swirled her hair around her pale face, and her wide-open eyes saw nothing. And I was frightened. This had happened simply because the baby was just a bit different in some other way from other babies. It had something, or lacked something, so that it did not exactly accord with the definition. There was the little thing that made it not quite right, not quite like other people. A mutant, my father had called it. A mutant! I thought of some of the texts I knew. I recalled the address from a visiting preacher, the hatred there had been in his voice when he thundered from the church pulpit, "Accursed is the mutant!" Accursed is the mutant, the enemy, not only of the human race, but of all the species that God had ordered, the seed of the devil within, trying eternally to grow into fruition in order that it may destroy the divine order and turn our land, the stronghold of God's will upon earth, into a lewd chaos like the fringes, trying to make it a place without law, like those lands in the south that Uncle Axel had spoken of, where the plants and the animals, and the almost human beings too, brought forth travesties, where the true stock had given place to unnameable creatures, abominable growths flourished, and the spirits of evil mocked the Lord with their obscene fantasies. Just a small difference. This little thing was only the first step. I prayed very earnestly on those nights. "God," I said, "please, please, God, let me be like the other people. I don't want to be different. Can't you make it so that when I wake up in the morning, I'll be just like everyone else? Please, God, please." But in the morning, when I tested myself, I would soon pick up thoughts of Rosalind or one of the others, and I knew the prayer hadn't changed anything. I had to get up, still just the same person who had gone to bed the night before, and I had to go out into the big kitchen and there eat my breakfast, staring at the panel on the wall, which had somehow stopped being just part of the furniture and seemed to stare back at me with the words, "Accursed is the mutant in the sight of God and man." And I went on being very frightened. After about the fifth night that praying hadn't done any good, Uncle Axel caught up with me, leaving the breakfast table, and said I needed to come along and help him fix a plow. And after we'd worked on that for a couple of hours, he declared a rest. So we left the forge to sit in the sun with our backs against the wall. He gave me a chunk of oatcake, and we munched for a minute or two, and then he said, "Well now, Davy, let's have it." "Have what?" I said stupidly. "Whatever it is, it's been making you look as if you were sick for something the last day or two," he told me. "What's your trouble? Has somebody found out about you?" "No," I said, and he looked relieved. "Well, what is it then?" So I told him about Aunt Harriet and the baby, and before I finished, I was talking through my tears, and it was such a relief to be able to share it with someone. "It was her face as she drove away," I explained. "I'd never seen anyone look like that before. I kept on seeing it in the water." And I looked up at him as I finished. His face was as grim as I had ever seen it. The corners of his mouth were pulled down. "So that was it," he said, nodding once or twice. "It was all because the baby was different," I repeated. And there was Sophie, too. I didn't understand properly before. I'm frightened, Uncle Axel. What are they going to do to me when they find out I'm different? And he put his hand on my shoulder. No one else is ever going to know about it, he told me again. No one but me, and I'm safe. But it did not seem as reassuring now as it had been when he had said it before. There was that one boy who stopped, I reminded him. Perhaps they found out about him? He shook his head. I reckon you can rest easy about that, Davy. I found out there was a boy killed just about the time you said. Walter Brent, his name was. He was about 9 years old. He was fooling around when his father was falling trees, and a tree got him, the poor lad. Where? I asked. Oh, 9 or 10 miles away, on a farm, over by Chipping, he said. And I thought back. The direction of Chipping certainly fitted, and it was just the kind of accident that would account for a sudden, unexplained stop. And without any ill will towards the unknown Walter, I hoped and I thought that was the explanation. And then Uncle Axel backtracked a bit. There's no reason at all why anyone should find out. There's nothing to show. They can only know if you let them. You've got to learn to watch yourself, Davy, and they'll never find out. What did they do to Sophie? I asked once more. But again, he refused to answer, and he went on. Remember what I told you. They think that they are the true image, but they don't even know that for sure. And even if the old people were the same kind as I am, and they are, so what? Oh, I know people tell stories about how wonderful they were, and how wonderful their world was, and how one day we'll get back again all those things the old people had. But there's a lot of nonsense mixed up in what they say about them. But even if there's a lot of truth too, what is the good of trying so hard to keep in their path? Where are they now, and their wonderful world? Well, God sent tribulation upon them, I quoted. Ah, sure. You certainly have taken in them preacher words, haven't you? It's easy enough to say, but not so easy to understand, especially when you've seen a bit of the world like I have, and what it all means. Tribulation isn't just storms and hurricanes, floods and fires, like them other things they had in the Bible. It was like all of them put together, and something else a lot worse too. Whatever it was made those black coasts, and the ruins that glow there at night, and the Badlands. Oh, I don't know. Maybe there's something about that in the Bible, about Sodom and Gomorrah, only this one's kind of bigger. But what I don't understand is the strange things it did to what was left. Except in Labrador, I suggested. Not except in Labrador, but less in Labrador and Newf than any other place I've seen, he corrected me. What could it have been, this terrible thing that must have happened, and why? I can almost understand that God, made angry, might destroy all living things, or the world itself, but I don't understand this instability, this big mess of deviations. It makes no sense to me. But I didn't see his difficulty. After all, God, being all-powerful, could cause anything he liked, and I tried to explain this to Uncle Axel, but he shook his head. No, Davy, we've got to believe that God is sane. We'd be lost indeed if we didn't do that. But whatever happened out there, and he waved his arm toward the horizon, what happened there was not sane at all. It was something vast, yet something beneath the wisdom of God. So what was it? What could it have been? But tribulation, I began. Uncle Axel was impatient. A word, he said, a rusty mirror, reflecting nothing. It would do the preachers good to see it for themselves. They wouldn't understand it either, and they might begin to think a bit more. They might begin to ask themselves, what are we doing? What are we preaching? What were the old people really like? What was it that they did to bring this frightful disaster down upon themselves and the whole world? And after a bit, they might begin to say, are we right? Tribulation has made the world a different place, and can we, therefore, ever hope to build it into the kind of world the old people lost? Should we try? What would be gained if we were to build up exactly the same that it culminated in another tribulation? For it is clear, boy, that however wonderful these old people were, they were not too wonderful to make some mistakes, and nobody knows, or is ever likely to know, where it was they were wise and where they were mistaken. Much of what he was saying went right over my head, but I think I caught the meaning, and I said, but uncle, If we don't try to be like the old people and rebuild the things that have been lost, what are we supposed to do? Well, we could try being ourselves for once and build the world that is instead of the world that's gone, he suggested. I don't understand, I told him. You mean not to worry about the true line or the true image? Not to worry about deviations? Not quite, he said. And then he looked sideways at me. You heard some heresy from your aunt. Well, here's a bit from one of your uncles. What do you think it is that makes a man a man? And I started listing the definition. And he cut me off after a few words. It is not, he said. A wax figure could have all of that, but he'd still be a wax figure, wouldn't he? I suppose he would. Well then, what makes a man is what's inside him. His soul? I suggested. No, he said. Souls are just something for churches to collect, all the same value, like a box full of nails. No, what makes a man is his mind. It's not really a thing. It's a quality. And all minds are not the same quality. Some are better and some are worse. The better they are, the more they mean. Do you see where I'm going? No, I admitted. It's this way, Davy. I reckon them church people are more or less right about most deviations, but not necessarily for the reasons they say. They're right because most deviations aren't no good. Now, say they did allow a deviation to live among us. What would be the good of it? Would a dozen arms and legs or a couple of heads or eyes like telescope give him any more of the quality that makes him a man? It wouldn't. Man got his physical shape, the true image they call it, even before he knew he was man at all. But it's what happened inside after that that made him human. He discovered he had nothing, what nothing else had. And that was what put him on a different level. Like a lot of the animals, he was physically pretty near as good as he needed to be. But he had this new quality, his mind, which was only in the early stages, and he developed it. That was the only thing he could usefully develop. It's the only way to open up to him, to develop the new qualities of mind. And Uncle Axel paused. There was a doctor on one of my ships who talked that way, and the more I got to thinking it over, the more I reckoned it was the way that made the most sense. Now, as I see it, some way or another, you and Rosalind and them others have got a new quality in your mind, and to pray to God to take it away is wrong. It would be like asking him to strike you blind or make you deaf. I know what you're up against, Davy, but quitting isn't the way out. There is no easy way out. You have to come to terms with this. You'll have to face it and decide that since that's the way things are with you, what is the best use that you can make of it and still keep yourselves safe? I did not, of course, follow him clearly through the first time, but some of the conversation stuck in my mind. The rest of it I could construct in half memory from later conversations, and I began to understand better later on, particularly after Michael had left to go to school. That evening, I told the others about Walter. We were sorry about his accident. Nevertheless, it was a relief to all of them to know that it had simply been an accident. One odd thing I discovered was that it turned out he was some sort of distant relation. My grandmother's last name had also been Brent. And after that, it seemed wiser for us to find out one another's names in order to prevent such an uncertainty occurring again. There were 8 of us in all now. Well, when I say that, I mean that there were 8 who could talk with thought shapes. There were some others who could send traces, but so weak and so limited that we didn't really count them. They were like someone who's not quite blind, but is scarcely able to see more than to know whether it is day or night. The occasional thought shapes we caught from them were involuntary and too fuzzy and dampened to make any sense.